I'm just going to share my screen. All right. If you have any technical difficulties as we're going through the workshop tonight, just send a message in the chat. I won't look at the chat for a few minutes while we get set up, but after that, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. And my name is Emily. I work for New Entry as the Technical Assistance Manager. And tonight we are in a great workshop called Integrated Pest Management for High Tunnels. New Entry's mission is to foster resilience in local, regional, and national food systems by training a new generation of farmers to produce food that is nutritious, culturally connected, and accessible to all individuals. New Entry has three main areas that we work in. We work in farmer training, food access, and national outreach. If you can introduce yourself in the chat, just your name, your pronouns, your farm name, and where you're located. I like to see where everyone's from and get to know everyone. I've been waiting for somebody to be here from Alaska, but I haven't had it happen yet. Hopefully one day. But yeah, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can rename yourself on Zoom if you'd like. Please mute yourself unless you are asking a question. And this meeting is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen on the recording, just please turn your video off. Surveys are what fund this workshop. This workshop is free because we have a grant to put it on, and the people that give us the grants like to know if people like the workshops or not, or if people are learning. So there's going to be a super quick survey at the end of the workshop just to see if you learned anything. And if you didn't learn anything, let me know. I usually put together these workshops or help put them together. So it's always good for me to know if it was helpful, what was the most helpful part of it. And there'll also be a little question at the end of that survey about our next upcoming workshop. The next workshop we're doing is going to be on diseases in high tunnels. So we want to know what diseases you're curious about. And if you are just like, man, I'm so bored of surveys, just think of Oprah like pointing at you and saying, you get a survey and you get a survey. It's so exciting to get a survey. And I'm going to put up a quick survey right now just to kind of see where everyone's at with high tunnel growing and make sure that we cover like the pests that you guys are interested in today. So there's be a quick question about what pests are you most concerned about in your high tunnels. So I'm going to launch it. And I'll leave the poll up while I go through the last couple of things to get us set up for tonight. So yeah, please fill out the poll. It's very quick, very easy. Today is just one of many workshops we're doing on high tunnels. We've already done 5 other workshops that we have on our YouTube page for you to watch. The next one's going to be, as I mentioned, preventing diseases in high tunnels.
I'm sort of like listening to a workshop.
And then the one after that's going to be about exploring new markets and keeping good records with your high tunnel production. So it's a pretty good workshop series that we've had so far. We've had some really great speakers, including our speakers that we have today. For other things that we have coming up, we have a crop production course starting on April 8th. It is online and live, which is a really fun course with one of our staff members, Ben Zoba, who is a great grower, and you will learn a lot from him. New Entry has a high tunnel battery climate that we just got installed last year, and we'll be having a tour of that soon in Beverly, Massachusetts. I'm still working on the date for that, but once I have a date, I'll let you all know. In today's workshop, we have Margaret Skinner from UVM, and we have Jack Mannix from Walker Farm. Right now, we're in the introduction section. Then we're going to have Margaret talk for a little bit about IPM basics. We'll have some time for Q&A.
I think you might be the last one.
Okay. Yeah, I think so.
And then we have some IPM from a farmer. We've got Jack here from Walker Farm. Be a little bit of Q&A time after that. And then Margaret will go over other pests that might be in your greenhouses. And then we'll have some more Q&A time after that. And somewhere in here, we're going to have like a 5-minute break so everyone can get up and stretch their legs. And if you keep good financial records of your farm and you have 2+ years of growing experience and you are a small scale vegetable farm, we will pay you for your financial records. If you're interested in taking part in our benchmarking study, you can put your email address in the chat or send me an email. I'm not Julian, I forgot to change the email address here, but you can email Julian or me, emily.round@tufts.edu, and I can get you into the study. We're trying to help farmers improve their business management and record keeping practices and build up some information about when a small scale farmer can become profitable, if there's certain enterprises that make them more profitable, if there's certain scales that they become profitable at, and help them to develop strategies to increase their profitability. So it's pretty cool stuff. And if you join the study, you'll also get a little pamphlet of where you are compared to other farms in the study. And it's all small scale vegetable farms that are usually newer. And yeah, so if you're ever wondering, is your farm good compared to other farms? This is a great way to kind of help us figure that out and help you figure it out. And thank you to our funder, Northeast Extension Risk Management Education. They are the ones who love all of the surveys that we do. And in general, they have been really great to us and make sure that we are able to put on these wonderful free workshops for y'all. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. And I'm just going to share the results so we can all kind of see where we're all at. We've got a lot of people in the intermediate level of their high tunnel experience, from advanced growers, some new people, and we've even got an expert in here. Exciting. Then for what people are concerned with, looks like 80% of you all said aphids. So aphids are definitely one that we care about a lot. And then I'll look to see if there's any other pests, but aphids are definitely number one. Then we've got, looks like caterpillars, thrips, spider mites, fungus gnats, cutworms. So if you're ever wondering if you're alone in your pest management struggles on your farm, I will just reiterate that you are not. You are not the only one with aphids, but Margaret has some great ways for us to deal with aphids today. And Jack's going to give us some of his lived experiences of being a farmer and dealing with bugs like aphids and other things. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Margaret can share her screen, and we'll get going with some pest management.
Right. It would be good maybe if people muted themselves, because I'm hearing a lot of background noise from people talking.
Yeah, I'm going through and muting people now. Usually I have it set to have people muted as they come in, but every once in a while I forget. So that is my bad. But if I see anyone who's unmuted, I'll probably just mute you. Oh, and if you have any questions as we're going along, feel free to pop them in the chat, or to come off mute and ask them. If you put stuff in the chat, I will read it out for you. I am very good at interrupting people when they're talking to ask questions. So feel free to do that. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you very much, Jack Mannix, for being part of this today. I'm Margaret Skinner, and another person who works here at the lab that works on Integrated Pest Management is Cheryl Sullivan, and so she's a co-author here. So who are we? So I'm a research professor and extension entomologist. I've been doing it for about 41 years. A lot of the research that we do is greenhouse and high tunnel IPM, but I also identify pests for growers and the public. And when I'm not doing all of those things, I also do some research and outreach on saffron cultivation. Cheryl Sullivan, she's a research assistant professor with 20 years of experience. She did a PhD here at our laboratory. She also works on various aspects of greenhouse and high tunnel IPM, and also tick management. And you'll hear from Jack specifically, but he's trumps us all in terms of years of experience. So we have worked with him for 20 years, 25 years. And it's great still to have him here and actively involved with growing. Okay, so I want to start with some basic definitions so that we're all on the same page. I know that different people have different ideas about what a high tunnel is, and it's sort of evolved over time. It used to be a plastic hoop house with no heat and no fans and no electricity, maybe water, maybe not. But now there's some high tunnel growers that have really, it's essentially a greenhouse with heat and everything, all the bells and whistles. So it can be a real wide range of conditions, and therefore the pest management options are different depending on what it is. Okay, so integrated pest management. I want to go through what that is too in my mind. I know a lot of people, if you say, well, what's integrated pest management? They say, oh, it's like organic crop production. And that really isn't necessarily it. Yes, organic growers must use integrated pest management, but they don't have the benefit of chemical pesticides, which a non-organic person has. Anyway, so integrated pest management basically means putting together a program that involves multiple management tools to reduce damage from insect pests and disease. It involves prevention, scouting and record keeping, cultural control, which is trapping or netting or rotation, etc., biological control, biorational pesticides, which are either natural or even non-natural products that have a low impact on non-target organisms, the environment, and is generally non-persistent over a long period of time. And then chemical pesticides, oftentimes they have a quick knockdown effect. They often have a high impact on non-targets and the environment, and often have a long residual. Okay, so the one thing that you got to remember is we love growing in high tunnels because it extends the growing season, it protects us from bad weather, et cetera, et cetera. But those same conditions that are good for growing plants are great for growing pests. So as we deal with all these weather issues, we're going to also be dealing with the pests. Now, I just want to, as we start going into this, I want you to feel free to ask questions whenever you want. Okay, so tonight I want to start with the end first. Um, I I don't even care if you get all of the details that we talk about here. Um, what I want you to start to realize is that IPM is a process, and some of you beginning growers, your head will be swimming by the end. You'll say, "Oh my God, how do I remember all this stuff?" Don't worry about it. Figure out the things that you can learn that make sense to you. Set your priorities, pick your battles, and don't try and do all the things that we talk about tonight in that first year. Say, I guess I'll try this little thing and that little thing. You'll have much more success and you'll feel more satisfied. And I think the bottom line is, you you got to have fun. And what you'll hear from Jack Mannix is that's what he's got. He's curious. He looks around at what's happening, what's working, what isn't working, and that makes all the difference. So that when you're doing some of these things that can be kind of tedious, you got to have a little bit of fun. Anyway, for this part of the presentation, I'm going to talk mostly about aphids, or I'm going to focus on aphids, but these processes are similar for other pests too. So now I'm going to go through step by step for IPM. Okay? The first thing is you got to make a plan. And the reason you do is I was thinking before this started, I have the luxury, I care about pests, insects, and beneficials. I don't have to worry about how am I going to sell my crop. I don't have to really worry about the diseases most of the time, how to keep the things cool or hot, how to manage my staff, all those things. You as farmers have to do it all. And it's a daunting task. And that's why for me, when I have a really big project, I like to make a plan so that I don't have to rethink the process every time. Okay. And this plan has to work for you. not what I think you need to do, but what you need to do. Okay. And we're going to go through some of these aspects of IPM: sanitation, prevention, scouting, record keeping. One of the most important things as you're making your plan is to build a network of experts. And those experts might be, where do you send a pest to get it identified? If you want to use biological control, what supplier do you use? If you're going to use a pesticide, what supplier are you going to use? Get to know some experienced growers so that you can ask them what's going on. And then develop a library of references that you can go back to. And then ultimately you have to come up with a management strategy that works for you. Okay. So step 2. So now you got your basic plan. Prevention is the first key step of effective IPM. You've got to start clean to stay clean. And these are a few different ways that insects, especially aphids, tend to come into your high tunnel. They hitchhike in on plants. They fly in from outside. They might be inside on weeds that you have, or they may have just been hanging out in the soil or in the weeds from last year's season. Okay. Now,
I have a quick question from the chat.
Yeah.
Do roll down side panels work better for pest management in high tunnels?
I'm so glad you asked that because there was a time when we all believed that, this is particularly for greenhouses, you needed to screen everything so that nothing could come in from outside. And now what people are realizing is that building up, there's lots of good pests good insects out there outside the high tunnel, as well as the bad ones. And so my feeling is, and Jack, you might have an opinion about this, sometimes you have to roll up the sides because you need more cooling and more ventilation to keep out powdery mildew and some of those kinds of things. But it is a trade-off when you're rolling up sides for keeping the pests out. Jack, do you have an opinion on that?
My audio on?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right, Margaret. There's a lot of good stuff outside. We find insect netting especially helpful for greenhouse cucumbers to keep the striped cucumber beetle out. And also, especially we do a fall winter CSA, we plant a lot of greens, and they're very handy in the fall to keep flea beetles out of getting on the arugula and the greens in there. So sometimes they're very, very helpful.
Yep. So those insects that Jack just mentioned, those are insects that do not necessarily respond all that well to biological control. And so when you're thinking of what pests you have and what strategy you're going to use, if you have cucumber beetles and flea beetles, you probably want to use some kind of netting. If you have aphids, you might be able to get away without using netting. The other thing that I was thinking about that is important, if a lot of you are starting in high tunnels for the first time, or you've grown stuff in them for maybe a year or two, you may not have so many pests. And you might think, hey, I'm doing really good. But in fact, it's just taken a while for those pests to figure out where you are. And so other growers have said to me, I get a free ride for maybe 3, sometimes even as much as 5 years. But then after that, by then, you potentially have these pest populations building up in or around your high tunnel. Anyway, so some of these prevention things help to discourage that. So one of the key things is to get rid of the debris at the end of the cropping season, because a lot of the pests that you had during the summer, they they might want to overwinter, and they would love to overwinter either in the ground, right under, or right within the crop debris. So if you're going to, let's say you're going to be able to fallow your greenhouse, leave it empty for a while. If you do that, get rid of all the green stuff, or else there's no point in fallowing it because it's really essentially not fallowed. Ideally, you should manage the weeds in and outside of your high tunnel. Pests often start in those weed areas. Oftentimes they're growing before the crop is growing, so the pests come to those, and then they move from the from the weeds into the crop itself. Select pest-resistant varieties. That's something that you learn about over time, and also from talking to other growers about what works or not. Spot spraying to clean up a growing area, and I'll just give you one example. We were working with a grower up here, and she had been growing greens that had lots and lots of aphids, and she transplanted with tomatoes. She was putting tomatoes in that same area, and she said, we said, those aphids, they're just going to crawl right up onto the tomatoes. And she said, well, that's okay, because you're going to be releasing a bunch of natural enemies, aren't you? And we said, yeah, but you've got so many aphids, there is no way that the natural enemies are going to be able to catch up fast enough. And so what she did was spray the area with, in her case, Pyganic. And I'd have to say, it knocked down the aphids, and she didn't have another problem with aphids the rest of the year because she augmented her area with other natural enemies. Okay, avoid starting crops in infested tunnels. Inspect incoming plant material and get rid of the ones that are really heavily infested. You might exclude pests, especially cucumber beetles, with some kind of floating row covers. Once you have your crop, you should be pruning it regularly to keep the bushiness down, especially with something like tomatoes. Plant trap crops or release biological control agents. Okay. Now, step 3 is devise a scouting plan. Now, I could come up with a scouting plan for you, and we used to tell growers, you need to count all the insects on your yellow sticky cards, and you need to write everything down, and they couldn't do it. It wasn't realistic. And so what you need to figure out for you, everybody needs to have some kind of scouting plan, but whether it's a daily plan, a weekly plan, or even less often than that, you just have to have something so that you know what's going on there. There was one grower, he didn't have a lot of time to do scouting. So what he would do every morning was he would walk up and down every aisle of his greenhouse, and he wasn't looking at every plant, but it gave him an idea of what was going on just by walking up and down and seeing damage or seeing evidence of the insect pests. You got to have a hand lens and know how to use it properly. These days they have these great digital scopes, and oftentimes they're wireless, so you can take it out into your greenhouse. It only costs, I don't know, $50. And then you can take the pictures and put it onto your computer and send it to someone that would help you identify it. Okay, you've got to scout the plants. And if you find an area where you're seeing some insects, maybe just 1 or 2, you might want to flag that area so you can watch how it progresses. Also, use your staff. If you spend a little bit of time training them about what to look for, that's another set of eyes. Okay. So scouting guidelines. Ideally, you need to be scouting your crop plants, the weeds, indicator plants if you're growing them, trap plants if you have them, and sticky cards. And the kinds of things you're looking for is there's the pests, but there's all the different life stages of the pests, ideally. You want to look for the eggs, maybe the cast skins of the aphids. You want to look to see if there's any beneficials there, because you might have a few pests, but as long as you have a bunch of beneficials, maybe then you don't have to worry so much. And then you need to look for damage. Okay, the most basic way that you should be scouting a plant is, you know, this picture shows in ornamentals, you can actually pick the plant up, tip it on its side, and tap it onto a piece of laminated white paper. And the insects will fall out, and you can get a sense, a relative sense of what the pests are. If you're using, if you have a tomato plant, you may put the white sheet of paper down at the base of the plant and tap it there. You ideally would look at all different levels of the plant for the pests. Some pests like to be at the top, some pests like to be at the bottom. So you really need to have a sense of what's going on everywhere. Okay. Now, looking for the damage is really effective. Some of these insects are so small, and at my advanced age, I don't see them quite so well anymore. But I can see distorted leaves made by aphids and thrips. I can look for stippling, you know, little white spots on the leaves, or silvering caused by thrips or spider mites. Honeydew is such a common way of knowing that you have aphids. Or just the droppings from caterpillars. Some of these are just a whole lot easier to see. Okay. Next. Write it down. And this picture there over to the right, the reason I love that is, okay, so you turn that over and you see, oh my God, I've got so many aphids. What am I going to do? But then you look, oh, a lot of those little white things, they're cast skins. They're not the aphids. Only those little pink things are the aphids that are actually alive. And then you see some of these aphid mummies. So that means you know that you have a bunch of parasitoids that are in this population and may very quickly overtake the aphids. So that's
Can
why
you explain a little more what an aphid mummy is?
Yes, let's see. I'm not sure if I have that later on, but I think I have it later on, okay? So I'll do that later. But a cast skin, does everybody know? A cast skin is basically, an aphid goes through multiple molts over its lifetime, each time getting a little bit bigger. And each time it gets kind of like a snake. And so in its wake, it leaves these white sort of flaky things, which is leftover skin. Now, very commonly, growers that are just learning about aphids, they will think that they have a really bad aphid population, and they'll call up their biological control supplier saying that they have a really bad problem, when in fact, most of them are just the cast skins. Okay, so ideally, you should, when you're writing the data, you need to write the date, obviously, what kind of crop you have, the variety, the growth stage, where the plant is in the high tunnel, how many aphids you actually have. And you don't have to count every one, but you could say, I got a whole lot, or I've got a few, or I've got 5 or 10, but I've got 2 or 3 signs of natural enemies. And so all of this information is going to help you decide what kind of action you might want to do later. Or it also will help if you want to call up some supplier and say, okay, I got a bunch of aphids. They're going to say, well, how many do you have? Is it all over your greenhouse or just in particular locations? The other thing that's really important is growers have said to me, Margaret, all winter long, I'll find 1 or 2 thrips and I don't worry too much about it. But if I see 1 or 2 thrips in April or May, I need to do something about it because the weather has changed and the day length has changed. And I know that that population is going to increase much more quickly. And by having the data from past years, you'll be able to say, I know when I started having a few aphids or a few thrips or whatever, I didn't do anything about it and it was a mistake. Okay. So this is some examples of different data sheets that you can use. These are the kinds of things we use mostly for research. This might be too complicated for you to do. So you might have to come up with your own more simple scouting form, but just come up with something that you can write things down with. Okay. Now, identifying the bug. It seems like that's an obvious thing. It's not always as obvious as you might think, especially as it comes to aphids. But you got to know the good ones from the bad ones. And here's a list of a lot of the pests that you are likely to run across in high tunnels. You should become familiar with what they look like, all the different life stages. If you're able to identify some of these things in the egg form and get rid of them as eggs, you will eliminate the pest further on down during the season. You need to be able to know what the parasitoids look like, what the adults, etc., look like, and you need to know who to call. Don't assume that you always know the answer to what species of aphid you have. Some growers I have known, they say, oh, they're pink. So I know that they're green peach aphid. And there are other aphids that will turn pink depending on what they're feeding on or what their population level is. And so it's really important to collect some specimens. In the case of aphids, the only way we can identify an aphid is with the adults. So even pictures are not usually all that effective for identifying the aphids. So you need to send some specimens, know where you send them. Even if right now, before the season begins, start figuring out who it is that you want to get on your list of experts. Okay. So why does the aphid species matter? Well, not all aphids are the same. Potato aphids, for example, reproduce much faster than green peach aphid. So if you know you have potato aphids in your tomatoes, you better do something right away. With green peach aphid, you got a little bit more wiggle room. You can wait and see what happens, or you can wait to release the natural enemy or do the spray. With potato aphid, you can't wait around. And then different parasitoid species work better on some aphids than others. So your supplier, they need to know what species you have so they can advise you what to do. Okay, so the thing about aphids is they suck. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts. And that's why they cause distortion of the leaves. They suck the sap out of the leaf and then it just kind of collapses on itself. They excrete honeydew, which causes sooty mold to grow. They transmit plant viruses. And the key is they reproduce very rapidly. And that's because they don't bother to go through the egg stage. All their little babies are all right inside their tummy. So they're giving birth to live little baby aphids. So that makes the reproductive cycle go much faster. And those little babies can feed on the plant just as well as the adults can. Okay, so obviously there's visual and food quality issues with aphids. And then if you have a really bad aphid problem, on your produce, you have to spend a lot of time washing it off. And the bottom line is they're really hard to manage. Okay. So here are the common species you're likely to find. You don't need to memorize all this. And the reason is, if I saw an aphid in a picture, I wouldn't be able to identify it. So you have to look at these little tubercles, which is these little knobs that are in between the eyes in the head. I need to look under a microscope to really be able to know those things. Now, the thing with foxglove aphid, which is a common problem, they have little green dots, and those are almost visible without a hand lens or anything. They're about the only one I could easily identify without looking under a microscope. The melon aphid is another one that's fairly distinctive because it has little black tailpipes there. But the bottom line is you need to get them identified. Sometimes an aphid population won't be just one species, it'll be multiple species. So you got to be alert to that too. Okay, so now here's the thing about the mummies. So if you're going to use biological control, here are some of the options you have. And again, you don't need to know all of these scientific names right off the top of your head. That's what a biological control supplier is supposed to do. But what it shows you here is Aphidius colmani. It's really good against green peach aphid and melon aphid. It isn't good at all against potato aphid and foxglove aphid. So you got to know the species to be able to order the right kind of natural enemy. So here's the way parasitoids work. So the adult, it's a wasp. It lays its egg in the aphid. That egg hatches inside, usually inside the aphid, and that maggot or that larva starts feeding on the guts of the aphid. Oh boy! And then it will pupate, and in the process of pupating, it uses the aphid body as a pupal case. You know, a moth makes a chrysalis or a pupal case that's kind of hard and crusty and protects it from other natural enemies, potentially other predators. So that's basically what these wasps do. While they're in there, they somehow use the body shape of the aphid. And so you're left with these, quote, mummies. And then as the pupa develops, it will ultimately, it turns into an adult, and it cuts a hole in the side of what used to be the aphid, and then comes out again. So that's what an aphid mummy is, okay? Are there any questions yet?
There are a couple questions, but they're not aphid related.
That's all right.
So there is one question that is, do you find that using weed fabric increases pest populations, like certain ones that like to harbor underneath it?
Jack, what do you think about that?
Well, yes, that can happen. What we will do typically when we can, and I'm specifically talking about ladybugs, which unfortunately aren't available this year because of the forest fires in California, the storms, and the overharvesting. But they have been the most effective for us on aphids. So on spinach, for example, we would spread ladybugs and then cover it with remay or polyester cover, and they would be active under that cover.
The thing about weed cloth too, some natural enemies, they need to pupate in the soil. And so something like Aphidoletes, which is a predator of aphids, they will not reproduce multiple, they won't remain, the population won't be sustained in your high tunnel if you don't have some ground for them to complete their development in. So it is a trade-off, but you also don't want to have a whole bunch of weeds. So you have to sort of think about what works best for you.
All right. Then the next question is, what mesh size is best for insect netting used in high tunnels or greenhouses?
Well, it depends on what pest you have. Now, something like if you're trying to keep out cucumber beetles, those are pretty big, or even flea beetles. They're kind of big. If you're trying to keep out thrips, they're a very small insect, and so you would need a different mesh size depending on the pests you're trying to target to keep out. That's why one size doesn't fit all. Okay,
Great, thank you.
I don't want to go through this in great detail, except for you to start realizing the different life stages, so you can, when you see it's kind of an ugly looking maggot like that, you probably are going to think, oh, that's got to be something bad, when in fact it's the predator of an aphid that came from this little midge there. You might see a bunch of eggs, and those are lacewing eggs. All of these things help to make you more aware of the total environment that you have in your greenhouse or your high tunnel. And I want to make sure that I think I need to stop in a minute, but there's lots of new things coming along all the time, and one of the newest things is this thing called a crazy mite. It is something that probably occurs here naturally, but it's now being mass produced in Canada, and very effective against aphids, as you can see there. It's not registered for use in all states. In Maine, for example, you're not allowed to use it yet, but I know in Vermont you can, and I think Massachusetts. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So I don't think I'm going to talk about habitat plants right now. I'll just talk about one, which are these green beans, which is just amazing. We had a grower in Vermont that was using a lot of natural enemies. He said, "Great, I'm really making progress. I have a lot less problems with whitefly, but I still have problems with spider mites." And the thing about spider mites is they tend to live in the crevices of your high tunnel. And they come down in the spring when it starts getting warm, and they're looking for food. And if they don't have any weeds there, you might have already planted some tomatoes, and they'll be happy as a clam. Well, if you plant green beans, they love green beans, and they will go to the green beans, and you can use it as a trap plant. Okay, I think I want to I'm almost done, and I don't think I need to go through this. I'd like to give Jack an opportunity to talk to right now. Okay,
Awesome.
so I think I'm gonna, okay, I'd like to just carry on, Jack, so that you have some time.
I do have a quick question from the chat. The aphid mummies, if you have them, does your spread of aphids stop?
Aphidius or aphids, did they say?
Well, are you saying, if you find a few of those mummies, does that mean you won't have any aphids? Probably not. It depends on how many aphids you have. The whole thing about biological control is it's not a pesticide. It's not a quick fix. And natural enemies are a population just like aphids. And so it takes a while for the aphids to increase their population, and it takes a while for the parasite to do it too. But if your aphid population is low, and you know that it isn't potato aphid, you could say, oh, I guess I can wait a little bit and see how it goes. And if you're scouting regularly, then you might use a wait and see attitude. But the other thing about, if you see some mummies, you might not want to spray insecticidal soap, for example, or soap and oil, because that is going to probably have an impact on those natural enemies that are occurring naturally or that were released in there before. Okay.
Thank you. Jack, are you going to share your screen or do you have your slides on? Okay.
No, you're
Oh.
going
I
to.
think Margaret has to stop
Oh,
sharing.
I have to unshare. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Already done.
Oh, good.
Oh, good. So we're gonna share this screen and share, and here we go. Oh, so thanks folks for tuning in. I want to thank Margaret for telling you that I've been involved in this for 52 years. I should add that I started at the age of 2, so I'm not that old.
So that means you're only 52 now?
Yeah. So Margaret and I have been on the road quite a bit through the years with talks, and we'll actually be appearing at the Comedy Club in Boston this weekend for a couple of shows if you want to tune in. So we have certainly learned a lot through participation with UVM, University of Vermont Entomology, and it's really changed the way we've dealt with things, because quite frankly, I hate to spray, and especially in a greenhouse, and we found pretty good success with the beneficials. So I'm going to take you through what we do, and the meeting. Okay, so is this going to, there we go. So we're Walker Farm. We're located in the southern portion of Dummerston, Vermont, in Dummerston, just across the border from Massachusetts. So we attract, we have a pretty good garden center, nursery, and organic farm stand. And yeah, we're certified. Our vegetables are certified, and vegetable plants are certified organic through Vermont Organic Farmers. Our garden center, we do buy in trees and shrubs, of course, that aren't organically grown. So we're split farm organic. This is a older Google picture of some of our structures. We have 26 greenhouse tunnel structures. Now, on the right, where you only see 2 tunnels, there's actually 6 tunnels now, 3 movable tunnels from Rimall and 3 stationary tunnels used to grow crops. 14 of these structures are used for the production of fall winter greens. We have a nice fall winter CSA of about 250 people, and that goes into mid or late January, and these structures, a lot of the structures we have, like this particular structure, we'll push 3 crops through. We'll do organic bedding plants in the spring. We'll do maybe peppers, eggplant, or determinate tomatoes in midsummer. That'll carry us into September, October, and then we'll plant fall winter greens. So we maximize the production. Of course, the most profitable one, of course, is the bedding plants, organic bedding plants, vegetable plants, because this is a 14 by 96, you can fit 750 10 by 20 trays. And if you're doing 806s at $5 a pack, that's $40 a tray. So you can do the math on 750 times 40, and then try to figure out how many beet greens you're going to get out of there in the fall. It's not going to be quite close enough. We also grow a lot of, I'd say 90% of our tomato production is inside. We have 4 structures for greenhouse tomatoes, and then that carry us until and we do succession plantings that carry us until Thanksgiving. We do grafted varieties, and we raise about 3,000 or 4,000 grafted plants for other tomato growers. And this is sort of one of our IPM methods. Is we're just actually gonna we're spreading compost in one of our first greenhouse, tomato greenhouse, today, and Friday or Saturday we hope to plant our first crop. And when they are starting to blossom, there's no bees around, so we buy in bumblebees, which honeybees do not like tomato pollen, but bumblebees do. So we have our IPM supplier supply us with bumblebees for pollination. Make a big difference. This was our original approach to pest control. Just ignore it and it'll go away many moons ago. But that didn't really work well, especially with climate change. And as we increased our greenhouse structures and we started using them for multiple crops, we had to do something different. And this is sort of our three-step approach to our organic pesticides, pests attack. The beneficials, of course, are the main thing that we use, the parasites, the parasitoids, and the predators. And I also feel that biostimulants and creating a healthy plant that can resist pests and pest attacks is really crucial. We started experimenting with organic biostimulants about 10 years ago. I didn't see many vegetable growers starting to use them then, but I saw a lot of flower growers interested in them, and I thought, well, if they're interested in them, then that might be something we could look into. And then as the last resort, we can use biopesticides, different strains of bacillus, like dipel, to attack a lot of the worms, especially like tomato hornworm or something. So Tuesday, like today, is our scouting day. And right now we are getting weekly shipments of from our IPM supplier of depending on what we need. So we go around and we replace the yellow sticky cards that we have in various crops. And you're going to see some of these are ornamental crops, but we use the same in our organic bedding plant houses and in our greens tunnels or tomato tunnels. Margaret taught us a long time ago, and Cheryl, about using trap plants. We find those very beneficial. We start our marigolds I think in horticulture you could sell marigolds 12 months out of the year, but we start our marigolds for trap plants in late December, usually early January. And you know, I feel they especially work well in organic houses because there's not a lot of blossoms that are attracting the bad guys, and they tend to go to yellow. And you know, your tomato plants and green and the pepper plants and things like that don't really in their early stages have a lot of blossom. So it's been very effective to place these throughout the greenhouses. And when we're doing our scouting, we'll check out our trap plants, see what's on them, and when we get our beneficials in, a lot of the beneficials we'll put on the trap plants so they can attack the pests before they start to spread. So once we find out what we need, then we're going to call our IPM supplier, and we're going to order whatever we think are the problems at the time. We're not doing like a blanket spread of beneficials because we scout and see what we need. But I should say, we operate in a preventative mode. Beneficials work best preventatively. If you find you've got a bad pest problem, it's too late for beneficials usually. You know, you're not going to get good results when your plants are covered with aphids or thrips. So that's why it's crucial to scout often. And when things start, when you first see a few signs of, there's only a few, it's probably not going to multiply. They're going to multiply. So you want to get in there and get them right away.
Jack, I've got a question in the chat from a newer grower. Can you explain a little bit more what a trap plant is?
Sure. A trap plant is we use marigolds for
I'm starting to write it out, so he can keep going, and he can elaborate on it after but I'll write it down in the chat.
Thank you, Margaret.
Okay?
Sure. And then there's another quick question. Do you interplant the marigolds with your cash crop, or do you put them along the tunnel?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do you interplant the marigolds with your cash crops, or do you put them along the tunnel?
Yeah, we put them right in with the crop. It's because we don't want them to go to the crop. They'll go to that yellow first before they go to the crop. And that gives us it's like an early warning system, that along with the yellow sticky cards about what is coming along. And the marigolds work the best because they're yellow and bugs are attracted to yellow. Where are we here? Oops. So you know, we're scouting on Tuesday, we're ordering on Thursday or Friday, and we're getting in I'm sorry, we're ordering Friday or Saturday, and then we're getting in our biologics that next Tuesday or Wednesday. So it takes a little while to get the process going. So you want to scout. You can't just call up and order and have them come next day, unless your supplier happens to have extra on hand. So you want to get in early. The first thing, and this is what we started doing now. The first thing we want to get in is what we call banker plants, and the banker plants are food for your bad guys. And so we'll get in oat grass, and we'll first get in the oat grass. I'll show you, I think, a little better here. We'll get in the oat grass, and then we'll let that grow up. We'll separate it and let it grow up a little bit, and then about 2 weeks later, we'll get in oat aphids, which aren't dangerous to vegetable or horticultural crops, but they love the oat grass. And so we'll let them multiply on the oat grass before we get in, or we happen to like aphids a lot, and as a wasp that parasitizes the aphids. So we'll let the aphids grow, and I'll show you how things progress. But once again, as Margaret was saying, you need to know what your aphid is, because Komani, Matricaria, and Ervi are all special really for different types of aphids and work best for certain types. Oops. Well, I just went past the aphid that we tend to have the most problem with, and that's the foxglove aphid. And the foxglove aphid, we found the best aphidius for that is the Ervi. They cost a little more, but the foxglove is a bigger aphid, and it's fast, so it's able to get out of the way sometimes of the Komani. The Komani will work on it a little bit, but the foxglove is able to beat a hasty retreat sometimes. So, but the Ervi is a little bigger also and a little faster, and so we found that works really good on the foxglove, and that's what is generally the problem with our if we get aphids on our tomato plants. So you know, you can get actually a combo pack of Ervi, Matricaria, and Komani, but it's pretty expensive, and you may not need all those different varieties. The Komani works really good on peach and melon, but yeah, once again, get your extension person to earn their pay and come out and identify what kind of aphids you have, because I'm not good at telling what they are, but they're very good with their 20 power lens. So when we first started, we would protect, like this is the oat grass with the oat aphids on it. So we would put hair nets over it to protect it from being infected until the aphids, the oat aphids could multiply enough to be attractive to the aphidius. But then we found these guys. We first got them. We got them from Taiwan, but you can get them in the U.S. now. They're called the bug dorms, and this is what we found very valuable. Starting our own insectary, we saved hundreds of dollars using this, and I'll show you why. So this is the bug dorm, and we have, you know, the oat grass growing inside of it, isolated, so it's not being infected by the predators or parasites quite yet. And so, whoops, we will, we have about 7 or 8 of these guys. And what we're doing here now, for example, here on the left, you'll see we just seeded down some oat grass. In the back, we have some oat grass growing with the oat aphids isolated. In the front one, we have the oat grass with the oat aphids, and we have released the aphidius in there, and they are multiplying and parasitizing the oat aphids. And so we're getting about 10 times the value of our aphidius by raising our own insectary. So what we'll do, we'll keep this process going. When this front tent is got a lot of mummies on it, we'll take all of them out and place them around the greenhouses, leave one in there, and then move the oat grass with the aphids on the back up into the front one, and then take the oat and leave one with the aphids on it in the back, and then we'll put these starter oats back in there and let them populate, and we'll continue that cycle. So now we don't order any aphidius. You know, we're producing because one thing about beneficials, they're not cheap. And you know, so if you can produce your own, it works. It's worked really well for us. This is an example of the oat grass with the oat aphids on it. And this is what we like to see just before we release, set the pots around in the greenhouses or tunnels. These are the mummies that that have been parasitized. Now, with the Ervi, it's a little different. I don't think I have any pictures of that, but we found that using fava beans, we get fava beans and we get pea aphids. And we found that the Ervi like the pea aphids, and so we do the same process with the tents, with the rotations, with pea aphids and fava beans. You have to trim back the fava beans a little bit. They get pretty big, but you can just clip them and they do well.
Where are you buying your oat aphids and the other aphid that you just mentioned? Where are you getting them from?
Well, I'll have a list at the back, but our supplier is IPM Labs in Lock, New York. Carol is awesome. She's even, I think, a little geekier than Margaret, and a real scientist, and she is just a wealth of information. So we like her a lot. This is I love this picture with this mummified aphid, and you can see the hole in the back, and it's released aphidius, free aphidius. You know, so it's saving us money, and it's really and those guys are ready to, you know, these pots are ready to place about the greenhouse, and they really do a great number of controlling them. Oh, I do have actually a fava bean picture here, and this you can see the mummified foxglove aphids on these fava beans, and they're ready to place around, especially our tomato houses, where they can really attack the foxglove aphid. So, you know, aphids aren't the only problem, so I'm going to go through quickly some of the other pests we have. Aphids are our problem pests. They're the most difficult to control. Margaret made a point the other day. We had a few beds of spinach that started to come back up in our first tomato house, and there were aphids on them. So we pulled those. We pulled them and pulled the plants. Had a crew go through, pull the plants, and then we sprayed the bed with pyganic. And so that knocked down, before we spread the compost or fertilizer or prepare the beds, we come in with the heavy stuff before we release the beneficials. So thrips, another issue for growers. I have a young woman that's been with us for I consider her a young woman still, because she started when she was 17, and she's 49 now. But she can spot a thrips like 100 feet away. So she is awesome, and does a lot of our scouting, and has taught other people. And we have sort of two separate divisions. We have the sort of flower division, and the organic division, and she's taught people from each area how to scout. So that's been very good for us. The thrips are not really a problem. We get cucumbers in every week, and we spread them. One of the problems that we do have is that we have a greenhouse we overwinter stock plants in for horticulture, so we even get things in through the winter to keep them under control every 2 weeks in the winter instead of every week. But the cucumbers do a tremendous job. We also like these little sachets that are slow release, that they're only like 50 cents each, and you can hang them like on a Christmas tree ornaments, and we put them on our tomato plants, or if they have little sticks, we'll stick them in a hanging basket, and they, instead of releasing everything at once, they're a slow release, and I think it works a little better to have them constantly being released. This is another product that we use, Nemesis. It's beneficial nematodes. These nematodes were actually developed for, and this is OMRI certified. These were developed for the control of flea beetles, but they found it also worked on thrips pupae. So we'll do that generally. We'll do a soaking with that generally every week on the pots before they're planted. It's Cynernema felchii, and you can see it's like a little worm-like stuff that gets into the thrips or flea beetles pupae. So very effective. You have to use them on a relatively soon after you get it to keep them fresh, or keep them in the fridge, but they work really well. The other problem that we've had is the two-spotted mite for us. And Persimmilus has controlled that remarkably well. There's various predators that will work for mites, but the Persimmilus seems to work the best for us. Persimmilus are the two-spotted mites are generally a problem when it's hot and dry. They don't like to be wet. So I think Margaret, we had an IPM gentleman one time from the West Coast who said, you know, you could spray your tomato plants with water and it would be almost as effective, or just as effective, as using an insecticide, getting rid of the mites. So, but the Persimmilus spread around have really controlled two-spotted mites. They're not a problem for us anymore. The other thing that's it's a little bit of a problem sometimes because they can get out of hand, but Incarcia formosa is a parasite for, or it's a predator, I forget, Margaret, but it's very effective against whitefly, and of course greenhouse whitefly love tomato plants, but you get them on these little ornaments that again we hang on the tomato plants, and they come in as eggs and that little black dot on the bottom, and they hatch out over a period of time, and they're very good at controlling whitefly, and they're relatively inexpensive too. One of the best aphid predators is the lacewing, and it works on just about everything. But we get those either in 5,000 or 10,000 count containers. And one of the things I like about them is that they tend to work in a little cooler climate than maybe some of the other beneficials. They still like it a little bit warm, but they are very effective on cleaning up a mess. And of course, the best cleanup has always been the ladybugs, but once again, probably not available this year. So we're going to have to keep a watch out and try to attack a lot of these things early to get control of them, because we could bring in a nice bundle of ladybugs and spread them around, and boy, they would clean up things rapidly. Instead of using, a pesticide as an alternative. And I will say, occasionally we have to go in with friendly fire, and that is, we have to use if things get out of control, we have to use pyganic. We know we're going to have to kill maybe our beneficials in the short term, but we need to clean up the mess. We have to do it, and then we can wait a period of time and start the beneficials again. Aureus is another of good beneficial that really is good to use to populate your habitat plants. We use alyssum a lot, which I think I have a picture of in a little bit. But we use alyssum in our greenhouse tomatoes at the end of each row to attract beneficials. Aureus are very popular for inside of tomato greenhouses. Once it gets warm and our sides are rolled up, or we have automatic sides on some of them, there's a lot of Aureus outside, and they will come in. We did an experiment with Cheryl Sullivan with alyssum this last summer, and she found an extraordinary number of parasitized insects on our tunnel tomatoes, and we thought it was better than previous years, and we think we owe it to the alyssum attracting so many beneficials. This is a new pest that hasn't really reached us yet. I don't know if it's in Massachusetts yet, but it's a thrips that cucumbers really doesn't control. There is this Lamonicus that supposedly works well on it. So I thought, well, why not get that? And then I talked with my IPM specialist, Carol, and she said, well, yeah, Lamonicus will work on that thrips, but it's not as effective as the Komani or some of the other thrips predators, I should say. And it costs about 3 times as much. So, you know, you might want to identify what you have and save some money and use the most effective strips. Here's an example of alyssum interplanted with crops to host beneficials that might not be, for example, I think those are day neutral strawberries that you know might not attract bugs because there's no blossoms on them yet, but they will go to the good bugs will go to the alyssum, and they'll be ready. The army will be ready and waiting to help you out in the field. This is also, like I say, you know, it doesn't always work like this. So occasionally we have to go in with a spray. We don't like to spray, but we can use, you know, dipel. Occasionally we have to go in with Entrust or Pyganic or as a direct that we've used. And as a direct and the dipels are more friendly to the beneficials. So that's our first choice if we can get it to work. As I said at the beginning, this is Armory approved material, Stimplex. I was going to put a video in here that's on YouTube. If you look up Acadia Sciences Stimplex, you'll see it on YouTube. They have a demonstration of unrooted cuttings set in different vials of liquid, and you can see what biostimulants do to the roots. There's like 4 or 5 times as many roots coming out of the stem, and we found it very beneficial to use in our irrigation system, along with mycorrhizae, root shield, of course, and we've been experimenting also with biochar to help our greenhouse tomatoes out. And one of the things we owe to different industries is the cannabis industry. They have the money, and they are responsible for developing a lot of these new organic pesticides and beneficials, because they work well in their enclosed enclosed facilities, I should say, factories almost. This is some sources for biologics info. This will be up, I guess, on the web, so you can sort of copy them later. But if you can, I would suggest, and I think it's in late January, or that the Tri-State Greenhouse IPM Conference of New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont get together, and they always have great speakers, and that's where we learned just about everything. We used to have to take a dog sled up to Burlington because we're 2.5 hours away, but now they do Zoom, so it's much easier. And we still get our 4 credits, so pesticide credits. That's good. Originally started with sound horticulture. Allison Kutz-Troutman is fantastic on the West Coast, but the freight was kind of tough. And Applied Bionomics has good stuff. But like I say, IPM Labs out of Locke, New York, really works well for us. Carol's fantastic. Copert and BioBest, of course, are other areas that have great biologics too. And I always advise people get as many greenhouse magazines as you can. Even if you just cruise through them, you'll usually find something that's applicable to your operation. These are some of the world's CEAG is big as a controlled environment agriculture, and a lot of that has to do with hydroponics. But you know, we've kept setting up structures because of climate change. And I think, you know, then we're getting a guaranteed crop. So you know, these will give you ideas on structures, on different methods of growth and controlling. And I think that is it.
Thank you, Jack.
Great. Emily.
Mhm.
So we said we were going to have a 5-minute break, which is fine. I'd love to get your feedback or feedback from everybody about whether people would rather hear some quick information about some of the other pests you might likely have, or would it be better to go into more detail on what habitat plants are and how to use them, and sort of how to use biological control within that system. I don't know which people would rather have.
Can you say those again? I'll put them in the chat. So it was more on
So one person said how to use biological control. If it is a complicated thing, and maybe how to use biological control with these what we call plant mediated IPM systems, ways to support those biological control agents. So we could focus on that a little bit rather than doing sort of some quick and dirty with other pests.
Okay. How about we, if you have something that you really are interested in, you can put it in the chat and we'll do a 5-minute break. And then when we get back, we will, we'll decide. All right. I'll see everyone at 7:24. Have a nice little break.
Cool.
All right, it is 7:24. Um, and I'm seeing a few different things in the chat for what people are interested in learning about. I'm seeing spotted wing Drosophila, Lone Star ticks, flipping tunnels to reduce pests on the next crop, like winter lettuce to tomatoes, biostimulants, habitat, trap plants and plantings to optimize beneficials, whiteflies, and host plants and trap crops. And then utilizing chickens and ducks and hugelculture to reduce pests. What of these do you feel like you are most equipped to tackle tonight, Margaret and Jack?
So I think we could start maybe with talking a little bit more about the difference between a trap plant, an indicator plant, and a habitat plant. So let's start with that. That's something that people should be doing right now, no matter how inexperienced they are. So let me just pull this thing up if I can, hopefully. And we'll start with that. And then some of these other things are good questions too.
And while you're pulling that up, I'm just going to remind everyone that there will be, when you exit the webinar, the Zoom call, a new screen will pop up in your web browser with a survey for this workshop. Please, pretty please fill out this survey. It's how we keep these workshops free. Our grantors like to see these surveys, and it helps us to make better workshops for you. Then I'll probably remind you again like 3 more times because we love surveys. And that's it.
Oops. Okay. Can you see that now?
I can see it, but I also see the rest of your screen. Can you make it big?
Let's see. How's that?
Uh, there we go. Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay. Now let me just, sorry, just a minute. Now it went to,
While you're
okay.
while you're doing that, I just wanted to talk to the person who says, "How do I get started in biologics?" And the first thing I think you need to do is identify the pest problems that you've had and that you might have. And yeah, my cat jumps up in my lap too. But you want to identify your problems, and then you want to get in touch, maybe with your university extension, or your try to develop a relationship with an IPM supplier, and they can walk you through the initial steps of how to approach it. So I would say start with sticky cards, start with scouting and writing things down, and then contact advisors.
Right. So, and you may not have anything in your high tunnel right now growing. So call someone up right now and say, like Carol, the nice thing about Carol Glenister at IPM Labs is she's very accessible. You could say, hey, I've never used natural enemies or biological control ever before. I had a real problem last year, because you should have sort of an idea of what problem you might have had. I had a real problem with aphids last year. And she'll say, well, what species of aphids? And you might say, I don't have any idea. And so, but you start developing a relationship. And if IPM Labs is not the only one, there are other ones too. And you could call around to find out which ones you feel a closer affinity to. So it's about developing a relationship. And I think, though I don't know, Emily, you would know this better. There is a plant diagnostic lab at UMass, I'm assuming.
There is. Yep.
So you could start to develop a relationship with them too, and say, hey, if I want to send some aphid specimens, how do I do it, et cetera, et cetera. And it may be on their website. And I realize that some of you are not from Massachusetts. Theoretically, every state should have a plant diagnostic lab at their university that is available to help you with identifying your pests. And if all else fails, you can call me. But they don't like that, because really you should be using your own state. But I never turn away an insect pest. Okay, so now I said this in the chat, but I wanted to say it again. When you hear Jack Mannix talk about, he uses the scientific names, and he knows a lot. He didn't used to know a lot, but over time he is he's learned how to do that. And I'll just say one thing. We started working with him when Western flower thrips were a big problem. And so we started working on various ways for him to control it. And he started really using biological control effectively. He said, Margaret, if I had a pesticide that worked really well, I'd probably still be using that today. But they stopped working because that insect reproduced so quickly that they developed resistance to the pesticides too quickly. And so that's why the natural enemies ended up, for him and for most people, working better than the chemical pesticides. So he wasn't always as much of an expert as he is now. And some of that is because he's naturally curious and he's watching what's going on. And so I think the more that you can develop that interest, the better, the more skilled you'll become. Okay, so now let me just quickly talk about trap plants, indicator plants, and habitat plants. They all have a different role to play. So a trap plant is there specifically to lure the pest out of the crop. That it has to be a plant that is more attractive than the crop. And what Jack said quite rightly is, when you grow a bunch of marigolds and you have, because they flower very quickly, quicker than the crop does. So you can attract aphids and thrips out of the crop that way. So then you have this marigold that's full of aphids or thrips or pests. Well, what are you going to do? Well, there's a couple of things you can do. You can release a bunch of natural enemies on those marigolds, and they will say, because natural enemies, if they are going to reproduce, and that's what you want, they need to have the pest around. So you don't want to have something so clean that you don't have any pests at all, but you want to keep them in a place that isn't your crop. So you can start releasing those natural enemies on that trap plant. And then when the natural enemy eats up all the pests that are on that trap plant, they will then ideally disperse out into your crop in search of other pests, other aphids. And natural enemies, wasps in particular, they're really good at finding, probably better than you are, at finding the pest. So the more that you can support a natural enemy population in your high tunnel, even if it means you have a few pests here and there, that's really good because that'll make sure that those natural enemies stay around.
I have
Okay,
two
so,
questions in the chat.
oops,
Um,
I'm not, okay, keep going. Yeah, they are.
um, how much time do you have between seeing the aphids on the trap crop before you need to have the beneficials on them?
Usually, we encourage, if you're going to use marigolds, it's good to release the natural enemies as soon as you put the plants out there, especially if they already have flowers, even if they don't have the pest. And the reason for that is a lot of these natural enemies will feed on pollen and nectar that the marigolds produce. So they'll have something else to eat in the absence of the prey. Okay. Does
Yep,
that
and then
answer the question? Yeah.
yep, and then the other question is, would you recommend using trap crops and destroying them? And how would you organically do that without spreading the problem?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay. Yes. Jack.
I could answer that too, Emily. That's a good question, because once it's good to have successive plantings of marigolds. They last for quite a while, but once they start to senesce, it's time to ditch them. You're going to ditch some of your good guys, but you're also going to ditch a lot of bad guys, and then start with a fresh crop that has fresh scent and vibrant blossoms, and just start again from the beginning.
Yep. And so the question of, well, how do I get rid of them? Well, you put them in a big bag and you tie that bag up very tightly, and then you walk out of the greenhouse. Do not cut the plant off at the stem, carry it out, and then put it in a bag, because you're going to be spreading the pests all over the place. Okay, so that's marigolds in particular. Then alyssum is another great one. It attracts all sorts of beneficials, both the parasitoids, predators. Oh, just they love everything. And so and so then I'm going to talk I talked a little bit before about the beans, and that's another case where you can use it as a trap plant, or as a trap plant and an indicator plant are sort of similar. Indicator means you're using it to scout for the pest or the natural enemies. And if the pest population gets too high and you're afraid that it's going to start moving out into the crop, that's when you bag it up and dispose of it and start over. Now, and then the last one is alyssum. So sometimes what growers do is in the early spring, they're really good, they're really motivated, they plant the beans, they plant the marigolds and the alyssum, and it's looking beautiful. Quite commonly they're placed at the front and the back of each row, and you got to water them, and so they need to be somehow linked with the drip irrigation system. But what you can't do is just plant them and then walk away, because they can, the balance between the natural enemy and the pest can sometimes get screwed up. And that's when you have too much of the pest and not enough of the natural enemy. And if you don't look at them from time to time, that's when it will become a problem. And you should have bagged them up and removed them. So the reason there are lots of different plants you can use, just like we use the marigolds and the beans and the alyssum. They're not a magic potion. But the reason we like these particular plants specifically is marigolds, the seed is cheap, easy to access. You can get flowers within 30 to 40 days usually. Sometimes even earlier if the day lengths are longer. Green beans are a dime a dozen. You just stick the beans into the ground. It's not a time consuming task. And so when you're deciding, what do I have time for? oh, just plant some marigolds and some beans and some alyssum and be done with it. That's a great way to get on the path towards better and more complicated IPM. So when Jack talks about the banker plant system with the netting and the cages, that is awesome that he's doing that. He couldn't have done that 40 years ago because it was too complicated. But now he's so good at all these other things, he's gone on to work on these other more complicated strategies. And so that's why it gets back to pick your battles, pick something that you really want to do. Let's say you said, okay, I'm going to try marigolds, beans, and alyssum this year, and I'm going to scout them regularly and see how it works. See what comes to them. Try and learn what all those different natural enemies are that are attracted to these combination of plants. And then next year you can work on something more complicated.
I have 2 more questions in the chat.
Yep.
The first one I know is very site specific to New Entry, because we have a massive flea beetle population, but there is a question about what is a great trap crop for flea beetles?
I hate flea beetles. They are so hard. When a grower comes to me and says they have flea beetles, I don't know what to say. Jack, what do you do?
Until we see them. If you wanted to use an indicator plant, you could grow a little pot of arugula, which will come up in a week, and you'll see them on that first, maybe before you plant your main crop of arugula. And then you'll know to keep an eye out for them. But yeah, I don't really know that they're attracted to marigolds or anything like that.
No, they might be attracted. Well, there's a whole bunch of different species, and some are fairly species specific, host specific. I don't have a good answer for that. There's potato flea aphids, and I think they probably are more attracted to the solanaceous plants. I'm not going to. You're going to be disappointed in me for that.
Kathy, maybe we'll have to get a UMass Amherst extension agent out to the farm to see if they have any answers for our flea beetle problem.
Well, one of the things is figuring out where is it coming from. If you had a bunch of weeds and leftover plants in the greenhouse, they'll overwinter there. Or even just out in the hedgerow nearby, they will overwinter there. So that trying to get rid of where they are is the best strategy. Someone else asked the question of how do you, I don't have the chat at my fingertips here. How do you transition to was that what it was? How do you transition to a new crop? I think that was one of the questions.
Yeah, flipping from a lettuce tunnel to a tomato tunnel was an example they were thinking of.
So one of the things that shows the conflicts in the production process. People are really into regenerative agriculture these days, and that means doing as little to disrupt the ecosystem in your high tunnel or whatever. So some growers are saying, oh, I don't want to rototill or cultivate in my high tunnel, or I want to do it very lightly. And so that's good for the agroecology, but it also is really good for the pests that are overwintering in the soil. And so I believe that what's going to happen as people use less rototilling, they will have more pest problems because of that, unless the natural enemies are able to sort of outcompete them. So it is a trade-off. What you do to prepare your high tunnel. Jack, what do you do when you're moving from lettuce to tomatoes?
you had mentioned before with the spinach, we examine the crop to see if it's a serious problem on it. And if it is, we remove the old crop, what's left over of the old crop. And get those guys out of there, and then maybe use a biopesticide, ideally, to clean up the house before we plant the tomatoes. But usually we're coming out of what's really essential, of course, is in the fall. If you're going to plant tomatoes, is really cleaning up that greenhouse. If I see any green in there, I'll have a little conversation with my crew of a grass or any kind of green little weed, because I'm very meticulous about keeping that greenhouse clean. Because you go to a little corner and you find a dandelion or something, look under the leaf, guess what's there? Little critters. So a cleanup is essential to start a tomato house.
So a lot of growers historically, maybe not now so much, they would grow their crops, it would get cold, they would be so tired, they would walk out the high tunnel, close the door, and wait until it started to get warm again. And they would enter into a house that was just full of all of these pests that had found a wonderful place to overwinter. And so you really, as Jack said, you got to start clean to stay clean. Now, this grower that I was talking about that had the problems with the aphids when she turned over her crop, she was really into this minimal tillage thing. So that meant that when she turned over the soil, but very minimally, so the leftover plants, all the aphids were just hanging out on the chunks of leaves from the whatever it was, the spinach or whatever it was. And whereas if she had used a more intensive rototilling, that probably would have gone further to eliminate the aphids before they moved up onto the crop. So a few people were asking when he said he was using Pyganic. Pyganic is an organically certified pesticide derived from the Pyrethrum daisy. And so it's good in that it's natural, but just because something is natural doesn't mean it isn't toxic to both you and to the natural enemies. And it's really good against the pests, as long as you can get it at the right time and get good coverage, etc. But it also is insects can develop resistance to it fairly quickly. And so the general recommendation that you need to read the label about how many times in a year that you are allowed to spray it in a high tunnel, and it's a limited use pesticide for that reason, to make sure that that the insects don't develop resistance. There's one other thing about using pesticides that you need to be aware of. When you decide that you're going to use a pesticide, any kind of pesticide, whether it's a chemical one or an organic one or whatever, you need to read the label. You need to make sure that it is registered in your state and that it is registered for use in a high tunnel on the pests and the crop that you want to use it for. Because if you don't, if it isn't registered for that pest and that environment and that crop, it is against the law. And you need, if you're going to spray a pesticide, you must have a pesticide license. So you need to be alert to those kinds of things. And I should say, not some pesticides, I think maybe insecticidal soap, you might not need to have a license, but I'm not sure about that. They're getting much more strict than they used to. So keep that in mind as you're making your decisions. I think that's why a lot of people have started using more and more beneficials, because you don't need a license to do it. There was one other thing that Jack talked about, and I would just want to mention about the habitat plants and these indicator plants, etc. So the whole point of a habitat plant is that it provides a habitat for the natural enemy, whether it's a natural enemy coming from outside or one that you actually paid for. These days, the cost of biological control is going through the roof. And some of that is because the cost of postage is so high. So that's one of the reasons that we worked on these habitat plants, as a way for growers to extend the natural enemy releases that they want to make. It used to be that you would always release natural enemies even if you didn't have the pest, because you wanted to make sure you had the natural enemies when they started showing up. That is cost prohibitive these days. And so that's why using something like a habitat plant is really effective.
There's a
Okay.
couple other questions in the chat. Let's see. What proportion of trap crops to cash crops should you have?
Ooh. That's a really interesting question. And it's something that Cheryl just got some funding. If it doesn't get pulled, who the heck knows anymore, but to look at that very question. Our general strategy has been to plant these combination of plants in front of each row of whatever you're growing. And we did that not because we knew scientifically that was the best approach. We did it because it seemed easy enough. It was something that growers would be able to do. It wasn't too demanding. There's some growers that put these little assemblages in the front of the row, in the middle of the row, and at the end of the row. And you could see the way Jack was doing it outside next to his strawberries was he had a whole row of alyssum. So we don't know what is the best strategy. So that's why you have to think, what works for you? What is something that you're going to be able to handle and take care of?
Thank you. The next question is about you have to be clean to stay clean. Does that involve also cleaning tools and shoes?
I don't think, well, I should qualify that. What's really important, let's say you have a high tunnel and it's full of spider mite. Well, it would make sense that if you're going to harvest or go into that high tunnel, you go into that tunnel last in the day or in the cycle, or you have someone different go into that high tunnel than into the other high tunnel, so that you don't spread it. So that's different than, it's different for a disease. So the insects or the mites, they like to get on your clothes. And so it's important to develop a path for your, which high tunnels do you go into first and which ones do you go into last, so that you don't spread those natural enemies around that way. It probably won't be so apt to occur on the tools, but more on your body.
Thank you. And then the next question, a grower has switched from pyganic to neem, but they're not really sure if it is better for the beneficials. If you have any thoughts on that, they feel like it is working just as well as the pyganic, if not better.
I don't know. There are some tables on which pesticide is more compatible with natural enemies than some natural enemies than others. There's some real questions about the accuracy of that information because, well, the best example is safer soap. You know, people like to use insecticidal soap, but it has a smell. And there is some evidence that discourages natural enemy activity around those plants. So it's a complicated thing, and that's why keeping track of your natural enemies when you're scouting as well as the pests is really important, because that'll tell you what's effective and what isn't so effective. I think
Great.
you need to assume that they all have some effect on natural enemies, maybe some to a lesser or greater extent.
Ideally, you're not using pyganic multiple times. Usually the pyganic will wipe out what's there. And occasionally maybe you have to go in and clean up a little more, but we find rotating with like a neem product like Acid Direct and then rotating that with pyganic works well for us. But I do think that the neem is easier on the beneficials than the pyganic is. Pyganic is a sure kill, and the neem is not quite as deadly.
Another question I get asked a lot is about praying mantises as a beneficial insect. How are they? Are they good? Are they not good? People seem to like them because they look cool, but are they actually effective?
I think they're generally not recommended. I don't know what their costs are. I certainly wouldn't turn them away if they ended up there, but I'm not sure I would invest in releasing them. I don't have a lot of experience with them. They aren't commonly used that I know of. Jack, do you know any growers that are using them?
No, I don't. I've seen them advertised in like gardening magazines and things, but I don't know any commercial growers that are actually using praying mantis.
I'm not sure. You know, the whole point of natural enemies really, in part, is you want something that's relatively cheap that you can get a lot of for a little bit of money, because all of these natural enemies, some are better at searching out the prey than others. And so you're going to want to spread them around, and you aren't going to get very many praying mantises. And I'm not sure how readily they're going to move throughout the crop. There was a
Thank you.
time, some people don't really believe in lacewings either. I think sort of for that same reason, but I know a lot of growers really swear by them now, including Jack.
One of them, yeah.
I love lacewings too.
I do too.
I just love the little weird worms running around on the plants because they are fast for a little like bug guy.
Cool.
I always think of the beneficials as when you walk into the Star Wars cafe. You know, there's so many different types and shapes and scary looks. Yeah. But and another thing to keep in mind is that we had to get used to. Once you start using beneficials, you're probably not going to have an absolutely clean greenhouse, because in order for the process to work, the beneficials have to have something to eat. And so, you know, if you do eliminate all aphids, fantastic. Then you don't have to buy any more beneficials for a while. But you're probably going to have a little bit of whitefly, a little bit of aphid population, a few thrips, but ideally not enough to cause any kind of serious damage.
Yep. The other thing that we spent a fair amount of time on in years gone by, it used to be that growers would say, "Oh, I can't use biological control because my customers, they don't like seeing anything on their plants. They're not going to buy stuff that have bugs on them. And over time, we have encouraged growers to educate their customers. And that's why there, you can see a sign there. We developed this sign that talks about integrated pest management, and we encourage growers to put these signs up all around their high tunnels or their operation to start educating the public. I think the public is more educated now than they ever were, but that's, I can say that about Vermont. I don't know whether Boston is there yet.
I would say that personally, I don't like aphids on my vegetables, but many other people that I work with are perfectly fine with it. But then again, I mostly am spending time around farmers and less regular people. Not to say that farmers are irregular, but I'll stop digging myself a hole there. There is another quick question in here, and this will probably be the last question we have because it's just about 8 o'clock. If Alyssum has given anyone trouble as being a clubroot host.
Wait, say that again?
If Alyssum has given anyone trouble by being a clubroot host, they are very strict with their crop rotations and don't usually use it when we're not growing brassicas, but I wonder if they could be a little more flexible with that.
Huh. I have never run into that problem. Have you, Jack?
Just a temporary plant for us in the greenhouses. So yeah, I really haven't, and we pull it when we're finished because it senesces. So we really haven't had an issue or noticed an issue. I'd like to look that up later on and see if that could possibly be a potential problem for us, but we haven't had it so far.
All right. Well,
So
it's 8 o'clock.
Okay, I wanted to just make sure that people know about the New England Vegetable Guide. That has great information. Somewhere, let's see if I can get this to move. Just a minute. There's a website if you wanted to look for more information on high tunnels. And we have a listserv and we have newsletters if you wanted to sign up. You just contact Cheryl Sullivan.
Awesome. So thank you everyone so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Margaret and Jack, for your wealth of information. I know I definitely learned a lot. And don't forget that there will be a survey that pops up after you close out of the Zoom meeting. Please take it. It's a very quick survey. I make them super, super duper short because I also do not like taking long surveys. And thank you to all of you for showing up. I will be sending out the recording and the slides and some other resources after the workshop. It usually takes me a few days. And thank you again. Just thank you all for coming. And someone is asking if you could put up the previous slide, Margaret.
Ooh, I hope you're going to do the survey too, but anyway.
Yeah, I'll send out the survey to everyone.
Okay.
The others, yes.
This one? Yep.
Carol, was it the New England Vegetable Management Guide that you were looking for? Yes, she says yes. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a great night. And there's lots of thank yous in the chat. So again, Margaret and Jack, thank you so much. This has been really great tonight.
Great. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to talk about bugs.
Yeah.
Yay, bug time.